She said she wanted someone kind, someone who listened, someone emotionally available who would treat her as partner rather than accessory. The words were sincere when she spoke them. She believed them. Her friends believed them. The culture that produced those preferences reinforced them constantly. And then she walked past the kind, listening, emotionally available man and fixed her attention on someone who embodied none of those stated criteria. Someone whose presence suggested something entirely different from what her conscious preferences described. The contradiction isn't hypocrisy. The contradiction reveals that stated preferences and actual attraction operate through different systems. The stated preferences emerge from conscious processing. What she thinks she should want, what would make logical sense to want, what her social environment has taught her to articulate as desirable. The actual attraction emerges from somewhere older and less verbal systems that evolved before language existed, responding to signals that consciousness processes poorly or not at all. The gap between what women say they want and what actually captures their attention has confused men for generations. The men who take the stated preferences at face value and optimize for them often find themselves puzzled when the optimization produces nothing. The men who seem to ignore the stated preferences entirely often receive the attention that should have gone to the optimizers. Today, we're examining why power, danger, and confidence attract women. Not because understanding this makes it fair or logical, but because understanding what actually operates allows you to participate in reality rather than in the fantasy of how things should work. The systems that govern attraction don't care about contemporary values. They don't update based on social progress. They continue running evaluations that made sense in environments that no longer exist, producing responses that seem irrational in modern context, but were entirely rational in the context where they evolved. Understanding these systems isn't endorsement of them. Understanding is simply accurate mapping of what's happening so you can navigate accordingly. The map that shows you where the terrain actually is serves you better than the map that shows you where the terrain should be. Rule-breaking behavior produces attraction. That rule-following behavior doesn't produce. The observation seems wrong. Society functions through rules. Rules create order that benefits everyone. The person who follows rules should receive social reward. Instead, the person who ignores rules often receives attention that rule followers don't. The attraction to rule breaking operates through several mechanisms. The rule breaker stands out. In a field of men who conform, the one who doesn't conform is visible. The visibility itself creates advantage regardless of what the visibility is for. But visibility alone doesn't explain the attraction. The rule-breaking signals something beyond mere difference. It signals that the rules don't apply to him or that he's chosen not to let them apply. Either interpretation suggests something about his position relative to constraints that bind others. The man who follows all the rules is demonstrating that the rules govern him. He operates within boundaries set by others. He conforms because conforming is required. The compliance is visible, and the visibility communicates something about where he falls in hierarchies that her systems are evaluating. The rule breaker demonstrates that the rules don't govern him the same way. He operates according to different calculus. The constraints that shape others' behavior don't shape his identically. The demonstration suggests that he's operating from a position of strength that permits the deviation. This isn't conscious reasoning on her part. She's not thinking his rule breaking suggests superior position in social hierarchy. Her systems are producing attraction response to signals that correlate with position without the correlation requiring conscious recognition. The unpredictability that rule-breaking creates produces emotional stimulation that predictable behavior can't produce. The man who does what's expected creates no surprise. No surprise creates no activation. The nervous system that isn't activated doesn't produce the heightened states that get interpreted as attraction. The rule breaker creates uncertainty about what happens next. The uncertainty activates attention. The attention produces heightened state. The heightened state gets associated with the person who produced it. The association forms foundation for attraction that calm predictability couldn't form. Emotional stimulation functions as the actual currency of attraction, regardless of what other currencies are claimed to matter. The man who stimulates her emotionally produces response that the man who doesn't stimulate her emotionally can't produce, regardless of what other qualities he possesses. The stimulation doesn't have to be positive in simple sense. The emotional activation that includes fear, uncertainty, excitement, these mixed states often produce stronger response than purely positive emotional activation. The complexity of the emotional experience creates engagement that simple pleasure doesn't create. The combination of fear and excitement creates particularly powerful pull. The situation that feels slightly dangerous while also feeling thrilling produces a state that's highly memorable. The person associated with that state benefits from the association. Theme parks understand this. The roller coaster that produces fear and excitement together creates experience people seek repeatedly. The same principle operates in attraction. The man who produces the analogous internal experience creates draw that the man producing only comfort or only fear couldn't create. Boldness signals inner strength through mechanism that's difficult to fake. Anyone can claim strength. The claim costs nothing. The man who acts boldly, who does what others won't do, who moves where others hesitate, has demonstrated something that claiming couldn't demonstrate. The demonstration matters because our systems are trying to evaluate something that words can't reliably indicate. Is he actually capable? Does he actually possess the strength? That would matter. The bold action provides evidence that statements about capability couldn't provide. Going against the crowd particularly signals this capability. The crowd represents social pressure that most people succumb to. The man who doesn't succumb has demonstrated that the pressure doesn't control him. The demonstration suggests internal resources that the pressure couldn't overwhelm. Independence from approval operates similarly. Most people calibrate their behavior towards securing approval from others. The calibration is visible. The man who seeks approval is communicating that approval is something he needs and doesn't possess independently. The man who doesn't seek approval, whose behavior doesn't adjust based on whether others are approving or not, communicates something different. He suggests that what others think doesn't govern him. The independence implies that his value is established internally rather than requiring external confirmation. This independence is attractive because it suggests self-sufficiency that would have mattered evolutionarily. The man who collapses without social support is vulnerable in ways the self-sufficient man isn't. Her systems evaluate self-sufficiency as they evaluate other indicators of capability. The main character behavior draws attention because it suggests he's shaping events rather than being shaped by them. Most people exist as background characters in environments organized by others. They wait for permission, they accept the roles assigned, they occupy space rather than claiming it. The man who acts as main character in his own life, who shapes circumstances rather than accepting them, who creates rather than waits, who moves through the world with protagonist energy. This man creates different impression than the man who seems to be waiting for someone else to organize his experience. The difference isn't just confidence, it's agency. The agentive man appears to control things. The control suggests power that being controlled doesn't suggest. Her systems respond to perceived control because control correlates with capabilities that matter. Living outside the system represents freedom that living inside the system doesn't represent. Most men follow the rules, wait their turn, accept the constraints. The acceptance is probably wise. The rules exist for reasons, the constraints often serve legitimate purposes, but the acceptance doesn't produce attraction. The acceptance produces the perception of someone operating within limits set by others. The man who seems to operate above those limits, who doesn't wait his turn, who doesn't follow the sequence, suggests access to something the constrained man doesn't have access to. The suggestion might not be accurate. The rule breaker might simply be willing to absorb consequences that the rule follower wisely avoids. But our systems aren't evaluating accuracy. They're responding to signals that suggest something regardless of whether what's suggested is true. The fantasy of escape plays into this attraction. Most people feel constrained by their lives, the obligations, the expectations, the structures that organize daily existence. These can feel confining even when they're serving valuable purposes. The man who seems unconstrained represents possible escape from constraint. Being with him might mean accessing freedom that's otherwise unavailable. The proximity to his apparent freedom might allow participation in freedom without having to create it independently. The fantasy isn't usually conscious. She's not thinking, if I'm with him, I can escape my constrained life. The attraction that operates beneath consciousness produces the pull toward him without the reasoning behind the pull being articulated. Status and power produce similar attraction patterns through related mechanisms. The wealthy man attracts attention that the poor man doesn't attract. The powerful man creates response that the powerless man doesn't create. The patterns resemble what danger and rule-breaking produce, even though the surface characteristics differ. The underlying signal is similar: freedom from constraint. The wealthy man isn't constrained by resource limitations that constrain others. The powerful man isn't subject to pressures that govern those below him in hierarchy. Both conditions suggest operating above the limits that most people experience. Power implies fewer constraints by definition. The man with power can do things the man without power can't do. The range of what's possible for him exceeds what's possible for others. The expanded range is itself attractive because it suggests resources that would extend to those connected to him. The attraction to power isn't mercenary in simple sense. She's not consciously calculating what she could extract from association with power. Her systems are responding to signals that correlate with survival and reproductive advantage. The response happens before conscious calculation could occur. Aligning with power offers indirect benefits that her systems recognize without conscious recognition. The protection that the powerful can provide, the resources they control, the access to environments and opportunities that their position creates. The alignment positions her to share in advantages that independent operation couldn't provide. The calculation that her systems run isn't mercenary because it isn't really calculation at all. It's response to signals that trigger response in ancestral environments where the associations actually matter for survival. The response continues operating regardless of whether the associations still matter. Aggression can be interpreted as protection because aggression directed outward suggests capacity to defend against threat. The man who's capable of aggression has capabilities that the man incapable of aggression doesn't have. The capability might be deployed for her benefit if she's connected to him. This is uncomfortable to acknowledge in contemporary context. Aggression is bad, violence is destructive. The man who's aggressive creates danger that should be avoided. All of this is true, and also her systems evaluate aggressive capability as potentially protective capability. Both things are true simultaneously. The evolutionary logic, the environment contained threats. The partner who could defend against those threats was more valuable than the partner who couldn't. The systems that produce attraction toward capable defenders were selected for. The systems continue operating regardless of how the threat landscape has changed. Choosing one strong partner can feel like reducing risk compared to facing multiple uncertain threats. The calculation isn't usually conscious, but the preference for dominant partner over absence of partner can emerge from assessment that the known quantity, even if dangerous, is preferable to unknown threats from multiple directions. The reasoning seems irrational when examined consciously. The dangerous partner is dangerous, the danger should be avoided, but the systems running attraction calculations aren't reasoning consciously. They're producing responses to patterns that triggered advantageous responses in environments where the reasoning would have been different. Attraction can override logical safety concerns because attraction and logical assessment operate through different systems. The logical system might conclude clearly that someone should be avoided. The attraction system, operating from different inputs and producing different outputs, might reach opposite conclusion. When the systems conflict, the attraction system often wins. The feeling is more immediate than the reasoning. The pull is more visceral than the conclusion. The attraction produces behavior that the logical assessment wouldn't have produced if it had been determining behavior alone. Extreme cases highlight the pattern most clearly. There are documented instances of notorious criminals receiving romantic attention despite or perhaps because of their notoriety. The attention seems incomprehensible. It reveals something about the systems generating it that ordinary cases might conceal. The extreme cases suggest that the systems evaluating for attraction respond to signals that overlap with dangerousness in ways that produce seemingly irrational outcomes. The dangerousness that should repel somehow attracts in certain configuration. The configuration that produces attraction includes elements we've discussed: power, rule breaking, emotional intensity, freedom from constraint. None of this means women want to be harmed. The systems producing attraction toward dangerous signals evolved in contexts where proximity to capable dangerous man might have produced protection rather than victimization. The systems aren't designed for modern contexts where the dangerousness is more likely to harm than protect. The appeal is rooted in psychological patterns that trace to survival and reproduction pressures that shaped human psychology over evolutionary timescales. The patterns aren't random preferences that could easily be other ways. They're structured responses to recurring challenges that ancestral populations faced. Status, protection, resources, capability, these matter for survival and for offspring survival. The systems that produced attraction towards signals of these qualities were selected for the modern expressions of those systems might seem disconnected from the original functions. The systems continue operating regardless. Identification creates indirect empowerment that helps explain why proximity to powerful or dangerous individuals feels attractive. By associating with someone bold or dominant, the associating person can feel as though they share in those traits. The sharing is psychological rather than actual, but the feeling of empowerment is real. The woman with the powerful man feels something of his power extending to her. The woman with the dangerous man feels something of his capability as potentially hers. The identification provides psychological benefit that existence without the identification wouldn't provide. The identification also positions her differently in social hierarchy. Association with high-status individual confers reflected status. The reflection might matter for how others treat her. The social benefit compounds the psychological benefit of the identification. Freedom and fearlessness function as core drivers underlying these various patterns. The common thread through power, danger, confidence, rule-breaking, independence. All of them suggest freedom from constraints that bind others and fearlessness about consequences that others avoid. The man who seems to do what he wants without hesitation or restraint represents possibility that constrained existence doesn't offer. The representation attracts because it suggests escape from limitation that everyday life contains. This isn't conscious calculation on her part. She's not reasoning through what his freedom would mean for her. Her systems respond to the signals his behavior produces. The response happens automatically. The attraction follows the response. Understanding these patterns doesn't require becoming dangerous or criminal. The patterns reveal what signals produce attraction. The signals can be produced through various means. The dangerous criminal produces certain signals through his dangerousness. The confident, capable, independent man might produce similar signals through different characteristics. Confidence functions as an accessible version of what danger produces. The confident man signals self-assurance that suggests capability without requiring the destructive elements that actual danger involves. The confidence produces some of the same attraction, responses that danger produces. Capability demonstrated through legitimate means signals what danger signals through illegitimate means. The man who's built something, who's mastered something, who's achieved something, he's demonstrated capability that creates similar response to what the dangerous man's capability creates. Independence from approval is achievable without any destructive element. The man who genuinely doesn't calibrate his behavior for approval produces the same signal that rule-breaking produces. The signal that external judgment doesn't govern him. The rule-breaking that produces attraction isn't essentially about breaking rules. It's about what the rule-breaking signals. The signals can be produced through other means. The man who operates from internal standards rather than external approval produces the signal without needing to break rules. The emotional stimulation that attraction requires can come from multiple sources. Danger provides emotional stimulation. So does excitement that doesn't involve danger. So does intensity that emerges from genuine engagement. The stimulation matters. The source of stimulation has flexibility. What you're learning here is the structure of what produces attraction, not prescription to become dangerous. The structure reveals that certain signals trigger certain responses. The responses follow the signals. The signals have multiple possible origins. The man who understands this doesn't need to manufacture danger. He needs to understand what danger signals and produce equivalent signals through means that don't require destruction. The confidence that suggests capability, the independence that suggests self-sufficiency, the emotional presence that creates stimulation. Power is achievable through legitimate development. The power that produces attraction isn't exclusively political or criminal. Economic power produces similar patterns. Social power produces similar patterns. The power to shape your own life, to operate agentically rather than passively, produces some of the same signals. The man building something is demonstrating capability that her systems evaluate. The man who's taking control of his direction is signaling agency that her systems register. The man who doesn't seek approval is communicating independence that her systems respond to. These qualities are within reach. They don't require becoming someone you prefer not to be. They require developing genuine characteristics that happen to produce the signals that attraction responds to. The development isn't manipulation. The development is becoming someone who actually possesses the qualities that the signals indicate. The manipulation will be producing signals that don't match underlying reality. The development is creating underlying reality that naturally produces the signals. Women aren't being fooled when they respond to these signals. Their systems are reading what's actually there. The man who develops genuine confidence, genuine independence, genuine capability, he's actually those things. The attraction that follows is response to what he actually is. The distinction matters because manipulation eventually fails. The signals that don't match underlying reality get discovered. The discovery produces the opposite of attraction. The genuine development produces signals that match reality. The match sustains. What explains the attraction to danger and power explains the attraction to their legitimate analogies. The systems responding to danger and power responding to what those things signal. Other things that produce the same signals produce the same responses. Confidence produces some of what danger produces. Capability produces some of what power produces. Independence produces some of what rule-breaking produces. The attraction that follows the dangerous, powerful, rule-breaking man also follows the confident, capable, independent man, perhaps to lesser degree, but through the same mechanisms. The man who seems to fear nothing produces response similar to the man who seems dangerous. The fearlessness is what's being responded to in both cases. The danger is one way to demonstrate fearlessness. Calm confidence is another. The man who seems to operate on his own terms produces response similar to the man who seems to operate above the rules. The independence is what's being responded to in both cases. The rule breaking is one way to demonstrate independence. Internal standards are another. The man who creates emotional intensity produces response similar to the man who creates emotional intensity through danger. The stimulation is what's being responded to in both cases. The danger is one way to create stimulation. Genuine presence and engagement is another. The parallel patterns reveal that the attraction isn't specifically to danger or crime or rule breaking as such. The attraction is to what those things indicate. What they indicate can be indicated through other means. This reframing matters because it provides path that doesn't require becoming destructive.